Alright, so I figured out a way to free up some ROM space, and I think this is kind of a creative idea with PF height. So I'm working on these levels, and I need as much sprite ROM space as possible for graphics. So what I discovered here, and I was just thinking about it, you can use PF height before using draw screen for any screen. So I do 2 screens overlapping to create 3 colors, and using PF height 3 with the multi-sprite kernel is giving me 22 rows. So it dawned on me that if I'm not using intricate changes in the rows, then I can actually raise the PF height value, thus decreasing the lines. And so this morning I did that, freed up 220 some odd bytes, which is actually a lot considering sprites are, 16 or 32 or whatever. They can be, depending on how big they are, several bytes. So I realized this is the method I'm going to use on the Ghostbusters game too, Ghosts or Bust, to lower the overall ROM footprint of the backgrounds. I looked at it and I realized I was using 2, which is 44 rows. So if you want a lot of sprites, you want a lot of stuff going on your screen, but you still want some relatively high resolution backgrounds. It's funny saying high resolution with Atari because we're talking about actually very, very low resolution. But the way the Atari draws graphics is always lines. And part of the way that I can even do the method of 3-color backgrounds and 3-color sprites is because of the archaic, odd way that the vertical blank is controlled with the Atari. It's just painting a line, then it's going to the next line, and then whatever interrupts are creating the segments. And so because it's doing that, the luminosity of each color is kind of in flux. So by layering the colors, you can create a 3rd color. And it's not foolproof though. You need to keep your colors lower brightness. You don't want to try really super bright colors when doing this. Basically, you want to have not too drastic of a variance in colors. So if you start off with let's say A2 as your background, like you have a blue sky or something, and then you want the ground to be green, well then you might want to stay around 0, 2, or 4 with your green color. You don't want to put A or E or something as your brightness, because then that's just going to flash like crazy. And honestly, when programming these games, I've noticed that even without graphical layering, you'll get flickering and problems with brightness based on how bright the colors will actually get. So the colors are too bright no matter what when you crank them up, and when you have big differences in brightness between colors, that causes more flickering and problems. It's the same with sound. I've noticed that the sound when programming on the Atari, if you don't keep the sound really, really low, then it's so loud that it's just like unbearably loud. So it's like there's no real way to fine-tune it. You're staying in the lower brightness colors because you have to, and you're staying at the very lowest volume with your sound volume with each channel because you have to do that. So regardless of whether I was layering backgrounds or layering colors, I'd probably be keeping my color brightnesses really low anyway. And that affects the depth of color too. I don't know if it would be luminosity or whatever, but it's not just brightness, it's shade. So your colors get brighter and darker, but they also have kind of a change in their shade, the way the color looks. So like 00 is black, okay, and then 0E, which is the highest grade for that color is white. So you're looking at the difference of black and white there. So AE would be the brightest shade of the brightest blue. Let's see, 2E would be a really bright brown. So 2.2 would be a relatively dark brown, but not too dark that it's not usable. So I'm saying it's staying in the 2s and 4 range, usually not brighter unless I can. And your emulators will be different than your systems, and so, you know, I've reiterated this dozens of times in my earlier videos. Testing on real hardware is absolutely essential with the Atari, and it might not be the case with programming a 3DO game or a Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo, even though you definitely want to test out on real hardware. But you could probably do the majority of your work in emulation before you start doing a lot of important testing through hardware. With Atari, before you really get deep into your game, you really should be testing it over and over again on hardware and on several different varieties of hardware, because they all vary, and several different television sets. So if all you have is a laptop and you don't even have a real Atari, and you're like, oh, I'm going to make an Atari game, and then you say, I made this Atari game, try it out on your system, and they're like, oh, well, it flickers and shakes and shimmers and jitters and stuff. Oh, well, it never did that on my computer. Well, your computer's not going to do that. So you'll have a little tiny bit of it sometimes, but never exactly the same as on a television. And they've got things set up on Stella to where you can emulate the effects of a television, but nothing's going to prepare you for, some of the drastic consequences that you face having never or having very limited testing on real hardware with a real CRT television. So, but with these backgrounds, as I'm going through, you can see PF height 3 is set at the very beginning. So up here, this is my first setting of it. Later on I might change this because every screen will have its own PF height level. Earlier when I showed my backgrounds in my video, you were seeing 22 rows per screen. Like here, this is with PF heights 22 rows. Okay, this should sharpen up here. As the more white that's in the screen, the blurrier the screen gets. It doesn't like big empty white areas. So this is kind of going to be hard to show. There we go. This one is another 22 rows. But as I go down here, and this has to do with complexity, one of the first universally reusable backgrounds is a road. And here it is. Now we can see where PF height 7, what we're looking at right here, allows me to have 11 rows instead of 22. And this frees up ROM space because it's not having to fill in ROM space with the definition. All graphics go into the 8th bank, but the commands for it take up ROM space and everything. And your 8th bank is your graphics. So before, when I first started this little adventure this morning, trying to free up some ROM space, and I realized, well, I'll just be able to, I can change PF heights to whatever I want. I freed up 225 bytes just by doing this. Now, but if you come at this from the angle that you're going to be doing this no matter what, so in the future I'll probably remember this. Keeping your shapes that will involve larger, wider, solid color rows in 2, 4, and 6, and 8 line increments will enable this to happen. So if you're doing everything in odd numbers like 1s and 3s to get thinner lines, then whatever larger, darker color is behind that or around it, make sure that that thin line is within the boundaries of your evenly divisible larger lines. And then you can shrink your PF heights until you can create larger rows. So this one, those are the edges of the road. If I go up here, this is the lines of the road. Now I showed this on my last video, and these were actually 3 segment road, what are they called? The lines on the road. But because I wanted to try this, they became 4 segment as they're multiplied by the PF height. So I'm going to scroll up here, and let's see, L6, I think that might be where I was, or this is the side-by-side one. Doing this with my left hand here, okay. So here we go. Now this is with some brighter colors. I'm trying to test the boundaries of the colors to achieve a brighter yellow, so that it's more reminiscent of road colors. And so this is slightly changed. It has a little bit brighter blue, a little bit brighter yellow, and the character can move here. The width is still relatively thin, because with this particular one of them is still the PF height 3. And so I can have the thinner lines, but the larger bricks of color are double width because they're the PF height 7. The way you calculate is by adding 1 to the number, then dividing that by 88, because the highest number resolution for your multi-sprite kernel without sprites is going to be 88 rows. And I've said this yesterday too, you can trick, using my method here, you can actually trick the game into having the higher resolution rows and still have sprites. The way you do that is you have one screen of high resolution rows but no sprites on that screen, and then a second screen that's whatever lower than 88 rows you want, that will go over top it. So you're not going to have 2 layered 88 row, but you can have an 88 row and then a 44 line row, or a 22 line, or an 11 line. So with the first values that you can use with PF height, you're looking at 0, which would be 0 plus 1, giving you 88 rows, 1, 3, or 7. Okay, 1's the most usable with 44 rows. 3 gives you 4, which divides into 22 rows. 7 gives you 8, which divides into 11 rows. So you're dealing with, and now there are larger ones, but then you're just dealing with, a couple of rows of color, and it doesn't blend well with the others. So if you're going to use even larger, suppose you just have a screen that is literally divided by 2 blocks of color and that's it, then you can use higher numbers. But for combining the higher resolutions with the slightly lower ones, then you're going to want to keep it within 0, 1, 3, or 7. This is 3 blended with 7. The layer that has the thinner lines, making the road lines, is 3. Okay, but then the blocks, the green blocks, are actually 1 row using 7. And then the street itself is either empty or it's going to be blocks, but they're separated by the same widths, empty or filled. And the sky, of course, is 2 rows using the lower resolution. So this frees ROM space, and that's essential. The more you do that, the more room you have for other things like sprites. Another thing I considered trying with this game, and I haven't done this before, and I'm going to talk about that later on in this video, possibly, is using a mini kernel to enable text. That's something that's one of the later kernels that was written for the 2600. People were like, hey, we want to have role-playing games. We want to have messages on the screen. We want to have things that can be said. And it takes up some graphic ROM space, but it can be used to do many rows of text that can appear. We're not talking about paragraphs, but it's an alphabet. and then it's spaced out letters to form words. I think, of course, there are limitations. I think it's like 12 letters per row, and then maybe 2 rows per screen, or 2 different statements per screen, something like. There are limits, but there are ways around it to where you can have several rows of text that can appear. And so I was thinking, what about little tiny word balloons or something to that effect? But being able to have text appear on the screen would give much more depth to the story. So you could walk up to a person and then the text could say, we're starving, and then you know to go find food and bring it to them. Or the text can say, give me ammo and I'll let you in, and they could be in front of a door. So you go get ammo, you hand it to them, and then they move out of the way and you can go through the door. I got bit, give me the vaccine, or something like anything to further the story. With the Star Trek game I was working on, this could really help drastically, because you could come up with lots and lots of different statements that could be made, combinations of keywords, and you could say, shields down, and then that could be 2 statements, and then the down statement could be used with anything else. So they could say weapons down, they could say, whatever. So, filling it in with statements, beam me up, whatever. Any kind of statements where you can use those, the text to communicate. Now, I don't know if I will be able to use it with this game, but I did download the stuff to look into it, the manual, to kind of figure out how to integrate it in the game and what it might look like. It does work essentially the same with multi-sprite as it does with standard. There are some differences with the DPC Plus, but I'm not using DPC Plus. And I wouldn't recommend using DPC Plus until you know you can get an ARM chip easily. Unless you know something I don't, you can sell bin files all day long. That's going to be the most costly way to make a game. And there are a couple out there. I think there are 2 or so, maybe 1 or 2 out in the wild that somebody made. And then maybe Atari said they'd make them, but those are going to be the most expensive. And then the cheapest ones, because the EPROMs are everywhere, and because the PCBs are very easy to make and cheap, are the bank switched games. Those are going to be your best. So 32K bank switch is where I'm going with my next handful of games. I'm avoiding Super Chip because I'm not really using the graphic capabilities of it, and so I just have to rework my variables, even though it was a drastic amount more variables. Okay, so let's look at another screen that was also shown yesterday. Now, and this one has been completely changed. We'll go to the one I just showed in code, but not yet on the screen. We'll go to 5. And there we go. Now, if you remember this, it had smaller road paint there, the lines on the road. But so now those are a little longer. But by making these 2 segments, 2 rows wide, instead of 3 single row segments, this scene can be reworked to be 2 11-row screens instead of 2 22-row screens. And that saves a considerable amount of ROM space. We're talking about bytes here, but in all, you're dealing with 32 kilobytes total, which is, in the real world, absolutely useless. I mean, there are fonts that you're using on your computer where a couple of letters are more than 32 kilobytes. So if you're using one of these advanced high-resolution type fonts, for real, it could be that 1 or 2 of those is 32 kilobytes. And we're dealing with systems that have 8 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabytes of RAM, where you're looking at an image that you might have downloaded that is, 4 megabytes for just one image. We're uploading videos to the internet that are 4 or 8 or 10 or 12 gigabytes for one video. So what I'm creating here is using, 9 volt drop to 5 volt power supply with an 8-bit processor that's producing less than hundreds of colors and extremely low resolution, extremely low kilobyte ROMs. Most of the games we all played on Atari were 2 or 4K, and then sometimes later in it they got some 16K, 8 or 16K games. Very few games were ever 32K. There are only a handful, and there might be only just a very small number of games that ever got there. So 32K is monstrous on an Atari 2600, unless you're using modern ARM chips or special boards that are kind of doing more advanced things than what any of the hardware back then could do. You're stuck in that 32K bank switch world, and those PCBs are dirt cheap. The erasable, reprogrammable EPROM. That's what EPROM is erasable, programmable read-only memory chip. It's got a window on the top of it and a chip that can be ultraviolet erased and then reflashed with your program many, many, many times. And then you get a sticker or a piece of tape or something and cover that window, and as long as UV light doesn't get in there, that's what the game will be. And so the erasable PROMs, the EPROMs, are the best ones, and then EPROMs are erasable in that you can actually just write right over the data that's on them. So an EPROM, you have to erase it with ultraviolet light. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. An EPROM, you can just write right over the thing and put your own new data on there. Now, there probably are ways to use these methods to create several games on one cartridge. So suppose you don't want to deal with bank switching, but you made a 2K game, then another or 4K game, then another 4K game, then another 4K game. Well, you could probably put 3 or 4 4K games on one 32K bank switching chip, and then maybe make a menu that will pick the game that you're going to play, and then once it picks it, it's stuck in that bank switching of 2 4K chunks. There's no reason you couldn't do that. What I like to do is as much graphics as possible, as much gameplay and variety as possible, and so kind of veering off a little bit. Now let's look at some other ones, the more complex ones that I've used to achieve this less ROM but still good looking images. We'll look at 10, a reusable room. Here we go. This one has had that done, where one of the screens is 11 rows, and then the main screen is 22, thus freeing. It makes it take up 1/4 less ROM space. I think the door ended up being slightly larger. I had to adjust the 22 rows so that there wouldn't be odd intervals. That way the floor and the wall, or whatever other colors, will fit in using the 11 rows. So PF heights is very, very useful if you're creative to be able to do things like this. Now the last one, my multi-use building, I think, and I'm still on the fence about how I want to, if I'm going to keep this the way that it is, because it kind of changed it a little bit. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Now this is a building. And the colors can be changed. Now what I did was changed it so that it looks like there's kind of a step up before you go into the door. And I might remove that so that the building is more universal. And then it'll just be a blue row across the bottom and then just a door. And then of course the colors can all be changed. You could have it be a pink building with a, you know, green stripe across the bottom and a blue door or whatever. How, you know, whatever colors you want to throw on there. So I took off the bottom row, which I think is fine. It's just makes it so the lower row PF height, which would be 7, so it's 11 rows, takes up less ROM space, but you can still achieve roughly the same effect. So we'll try one more. We'll go ahead and go with maybe 7. I think that's one of the hallways. Okay, yeah, this is just the connecting hallway. And I did the same thing with this. So the way you're doing this is before your draw screen, oops, we'll try 8. I'm leaning over here to do this because don't want to be too quiet. Okay. There's the hallway. All right. Probably going to be a very important type of screen here. And I did that with this too. So all of them have been changed as much as possible using that method. And the way we're going to do this is where your screen data is, where your draw screen's about to happen, and you've got your rows that will show lines of color for your data, your play field. You're going to want to define PF height in that loop, and you want to 11 rows PF height 7, 22 rows PF height 3. And of course if you want to do higher res, PF height 1, which would be the highest resolution with sprites being put on the screen at the same time. PF height 0 if you want 88 rows and you're not going to have sprites on the screen. Okay, so that's a little extra trick there. So now I'm utilizing my animation computer, which if you can see right here says Amiga system. I actually use this for Amiga emulation and also animation. So when I do stop motion animation, this is the computer I use, and as you can read here, as long as it's not blurring it out too bad, this is just a Pentium 4. So it's an older system, 2.6 gigahertz. And I've done recent upgrades to it. It actually has a rare powered 1 gigabyte AGP card, which if you remember AGP, kind of a short-lived video standard in between PCI and then PCI Express. It was what during the reign of 3DFX, which was really the best back in the day. So in the late 90s, turn of the millennium, 3DFX cards were called Voodoo cards. So the Voodoo, let's see, I got the 3500 TV with TV out. It came with a really super long purple cable and with a round dongle on the end that could have video inputs and outputs. And I used it for a long time exclusively through televisions. You could hook all kinds of monitors up to it at the same time and stuff. And it had 16 megabytes of RAM, and that was a lot at the time. So to put into perspective, the best graphics card from the time, which was the 3DFX Voodoo 3500 TV, had 16 megabytes of RAM. Okay, and so I actually got an AGP card with 1 gigabyte, and it's really fast. It rockets this system to where it really is fast, and I've upgraded it to 2 gigabytes of system RAM, which again is an incredible amount of memory for this type of system, and it's a Windows XP. So I've got Windows XP Professional, Service Pack 3, and Intel Pentium 4 CPU, 2.6 gigahertz, 2 gigs of RAM. And what I'm using this system for is to test different color setups for the screens, because this room where I do this work is right next to my CRT televisions that the Atari systems are all hooked up to. And so I'll be showing different color variants for some of the beginning screens of the zombie game, which I'm tentatively calling, and will likely call, RE Atari. My son and I agreed that that was a great name for the game, is RE Atari. So it's going to be called RE Atari, and I have to make sure that these screens will look good enough to use on a CRT. Now in emulation, they look great. So and if a person's using an HD TV or an emulator, 2600 plus, 7800 plus, or their PC, or something like that, and they're going through an HD TV, then this really has no bearing on it. I could really go wild with the colors. What I'll do sometimes, and what I might end up doing in this particular case, is writing a small loop within the program, just add to the controls to make it so one of the controllers will change the colors, and then I'll set up some color presets that I like, and then I'll use the second controller to cycle through color presets, and then I can take notes about which ones I like and which ones look good for the different screens. And what this will end up showing is not only kind of like how hard it is to come up with these radical graphics methods with the Atari 2600 in a way that looks presentable and isn't too dark and it doesn't flicker or shimmer too much, how hard it is to test and to come up with great balances of color with this method, but also this will show the varieties of color produced by the different Atari systems, because it's kind of NTSC is jokingly called never the same color. The NTSC, never the same color, because the TVs are all tuned differently, the systems all have different color tunings, and they all have slightly different color balances. The hues are different. A heavy sixer is going to look different than a 4-switcher, is going to look different than a Vader 4-switcher, is going to look different than a Sunnyvale 4-switcher, may look different than a Gemini, a Coleco Gemini Atari compatible system, also might look different than a Atari adapter on a 5200, or might look different than a 7800. All of them will look slightly different. You'll never plug in your Atari game cartridge and then plug it into a second different system and have exactly the same results. So I have to test on several systems through 2 different kinds of CRT style televisions and try to find a careful balance where the game will look good on as many systems as possible. And so to do this, I have an SD card plugged in. It's a high yield SD card, and I've got it ready. So here's that. This is where my work ROMs are. I'll go ahead and zoom out a little bit so that we can see this screen. This is a 4:3 ratio screen, but it's still high definition. It's a DVI screen, a Dell, and this is going through that system. The system card actually only has DVI outputs, so it doesn't have VGA out, and it has to be used through a DVI monitor, which is kind of an odd thing. And it doesn't have like power inputs that would normally be on a PCI Express card or something like that. It actually uses a Molex style 4-pin plug-in for the additional power. It has an onboard fan, and it runs great. It runs really great. The emulation is acceptable, although one of the problems with this 4x3 is that here in Visual Batari BASIC, as you can see, my font is very, very small. I have to keep it small to be able to see everything. So when I compile, if I want to see how much 8th bank ROM space I have left, I need to keep this little bar here as high up as possible. If I want to see the square sprites and play fields, I have to keep the font this size. I think this is 8. There's the background right here. So it's not as easy to program on, and it does take a little bit a little longer to compile, of course, because this is an older system. But because this is just for color testing, I can go in here and set up a level. I think level 1A is what this says here. I'll go ahead, it's on level 1, and so we'll go down to level 1A. Right here we are, and we can see that I've raised some of the colors. I honestly don't know if anyone could read this. I'll try to zoom in on the code a little bit here to see if I can kind of show what's going on. But right here we've got my color listings, this line with a whole bunch of red on it, and for my Kalu PF, which is color playfield, and Kalu BK color background, you can see that I've raised it up from 0 or 2 to 4, which is one grade of brighter color. And I'm trying to find a balance. So we'll go ahead and save and compile. And I can see I have that 1,275 bytes. That's what I attained by changing the PF height line size for particular screens. And I'm going to run it. Now this will run the Stella emulator, and it's an older one, in this on this operating system, and we can see that this game is running now. I think it's awfully bright in here. Let's see if I turn off this light, if that helps. I might change this camera setting, how it is, maybe raise it up and point it down, because I can see the screen's kind of dark up here. Maybe if I tilt it this way, it's not so great. So my building is brighter yellow, my lines, parking lines are brighter yellow, the car's brighter blue. You can see more of the color through her, and depending on what system, that could be bad. And then when she goes through the door, we have a darker orange kind of look. I'm probably going to change the floor color. I may change several colors about these backgrounds. So to test this change of color out, I'll take my SD card, and then I'll move over to my systems and then look through them, and you'd probably be surprised how they don't look like that. The screen that I just showed is actually not a valid indication of what I'll get with the actual system, the actual hardware. It will sometimes be way too dark, way too bright, it will flash and flicker too much, and so I'll have to come back and change the colors to get something that works well. Okay, but this is just part of creating it. Now if I want, and if I'm going to be faithful and more streamlined with my coding, I can just ignore this part. I can say forget it, I'll make the entire game in emulation, and then I'll just go ahead and start testing it on real hardware, and I'll adjust the colors at that point in time. But you want to test your game as early as possible. Once you get the basic framework of how the game's going to function, like I have here, I have 2 functional screens with a couple of sprites and some background items. You want to test it on hardware, because you might have tripped some wire here somewhere or there, and you're creating jittering or some effect that you're not going to want. And you don't want to program the entire game and then go, it's done, now I'm going to test it on real hardware, only to find out that it jitters and it shakes and is messed up the entire time. And then you get to go in there and try to figure out what's happening in code that's causing that. So it helps to test it on real hardware as soon as you get the initial framework of the game and functionality, way before you're ever in beta testing phase of the game. But in this particular case, I already know nothing jitters, but I do have some flashing and some different colors than what I'm getting from my emulation. So I want to adjust colors and test down on multiple systems. Something I'll also do when I'm moving the bin file over to this cartridge to test on real hardware, over to the SD card that'll go in the cartridge, is I will also back up the folder that I used to create the game. So here's the zombies, the work that's within that little folder, and here's where my bin file's been recreated, the 32K bank switching bin file, and then I'll copy and paste that in this area here with these the two games. This one I just completed, and this one is that freshly pasted, and I'll go ahead and rename it just so I know I have moved this. I'll take base out of the name, and we'll know this is just a bin file. Bin is binary. It is ones and zeros now. I also have all of my work backed up on this gigantic micro SD card, and I have a plethora of Atari games on here ready to play. So it can be used just as well to play however many Atari games you might want to try out to play. Lots of homebrew or whatever. So I'm going to remove this and then test out the color on with 3 different systems at first and on 2 different televisions. Alright. Here we have my Uno cart that I've just put my SD card in. Kind of hard to see here. I'm sure you can probably see it. This is a Sunnyvale 4-switcher, and it'll be the first system that we're testing it out on. I have Sega pads hooked up to it because that's what I prefer. And this is a CRT television. And it's an older one that's been refurbished and repaired a couple times in its past, and has a very crisp, clean picture. I don't mind RF signals, so it's not going to bother me to do this with RF signals. So original is fine with me. So here we go. Here's my zombie bin file. And here we go. And as I'm looking at it, it's too flashy. I don't know if you can see it flashing. Probably not. This is probably recording it and it's not picking up the flashing. But as I'm looking at it, the 2 overlapping colors are so bright, at least at the building level, that they're causing significant flashing. Okay, the street is okay, the parking is okay, the sign color is fine, but the building color is flashing too much. The color is bright though, so it's a good color level. It's just not agreeing with the refresh rate. So I'm going to go up and walk through the door, and here, this is not too flashy. But it's kind of like the 2 colors don't work well together. They contrast in a way that is a little too dark for my liking. So I'll need to change these colors around. I'm thinking of trying totally different colors. This is using a totally different color than before. Before I used the color A, which is a sky blue color. This time I used a lesser color, a lower blue color. I'll try lots of different colors until I find something that doesn't flash on the screen, but it's still bright. And I definitely want to keep the gray and the yellow, so that's going to be my goal. And as I go in here, I like how that looks, but again, what you're seeing, the table and the different items and stuff, from what I can see is there's not enough difference in the 2 overlaying colors to bring out the shelving system and where the items are. It just kind of looks like a mess. Okay, so now we're going to try it on a different system. I'll go ahead and I'll put the system in an Atari 7800. Actually, what I'll do first before I do that is I'll try it in this heavy 6er. Okay, so I'll be switching the RF plug-in here behind on my VCR. It just goes straight to the TV. So the VCR doesn't have to be on or anything. It just goes straight through the television. And then we'll be testing on this system with an original controller. Okay, so now we have the heavy 6er. And there's an immediate difference in color. It's more of a purplish blue color. Go ahead and and there we go, and it's cleaner and sharper, but it's still flashing. Now on the screen it doesn't look good. What I'm seeing in my view screen is too blue looking, but what I'm seeing in front of me, there's more flashing but sharper, cleaner. The building doesn't look like it's flashing as much as the blue contrasting color layer. So I can probably isolate that this is the blue color causing it. So I can try different blue colors. And then this looks totally different. This is really bright green. It's flashing, it's hard to look at. The shelf system is basically invisible behind the actual shelf rows. The TV or the table posts are basically invisible. The H-shaped what would be like doors behind the counter are essentially invisible. So the character looks great. The flesh tone character, the red outfit. So we're getting definitely some indicators that changes will have to be made here. Okay, so next up, I'm going to do this on a 7800 on a different CRT. Okay, this is on a Panasonic, a newer type of CRT. The old TV I went ahead and turned off so they don't conflict with each other here. And so this is the CRT I'm trying it on now. I've got just a normal Atari controller hooked up to my 7800. And it's already brighter and cleaner and clearer. That's probably more the TV, but it could be a little bit of both. And here we have much less flashing. It's almost tolerable. But again, in this case, it looks like the flashing might be a byproduct of the brown color instead of the blue, because the blue doesn't seem to be flashing so much. Either way, we know that there is a problem with contrast. The flesh tone in the red on the character looks great. So let's go ahead and enter the building, and I have a feeling it's going to be greenish. Let's see. Oh, it's again just like it was on the Sunnyvale 4 switcher, very similar. Orange, and the shelves and the little systems for the shelves are very hard to see. They blend in too much. What you might see is, to me, looks like it's just way too similar to where it's just a mess. It looks so I'll definitely be changing these colors several times until I get, you know, something I can use. But this is an idea of what you have to go through to fine-tune your game. Now, of course, this is because of these radical methods I'm using to get the 3-color sprites and the 3-color backgrounds, the higher resolution backgrounds. What most people are just going to do is use one single color. They'll just use a single color background or a color row background where there's no overlapping colors. So that's how the original Atari games were made. Roughly 98% or more of Atari games follow this rule, where all the graphics are lines, and they're either single color or they're rows of color, but there are no sprite-like colors. And so I'm going for the, you know, real sprite look. So here we go. Like a way to explain what I'm talking about, I think, would be look at the character. Okay, and you can see how her shorts go down, and then her shirt is in the same row as her arm colors. Well, that's not something anyone ever did on the Atari before. This takes combining 2 layers of single colors. So it's a method that I'm using that's not usually used to create these types of colors. And the screen's also kind of, I don't know, it's definitely not agreeing with the camera. We're having all kinds of lines and jittery shaking mess going on. So what I'm seeing though is there's too much flickering in the 2 colors, and so I'm going to be going through different changes of colors until I get things that don't flicker. I'm going to try to find the brightest setup with little or no flickering and then stick with that. And I have to come up with probably, you know, half a dozen different combinations of colors so that I can reuse these screens for lots of different things. Okay, so now we're back at the computer. The card's in place. I've got the visual Batari BASIC open here, and the scene I just looked at, I'm looking at 1-4, which is my playfield that's yellow. That's the brighter yellow. Now it could be the brighter yellow that's causing the problem, and I try to balance everything out, but I'm going to start with the blue color, which is a B4. Okay, and if we look at our TIA palette here, B4 is right here. Now I could go for green colors or brown colors. We could try all kinds of different colors. Close to yellow is 2-4, and that might actually be something to try. So just, you can experiment with anything, you know, and try every combination. Sometimes you'd be surprised. For instance, you know, I managed to combine 2 single color sprites to make the Ecto 1 white, blue, and red. How do you combine blue and white, or blue and red to make white? I don't know. I did it though. Okay, so let's try this real quick. There we go. Okay, and it's different. It's now we've got some brown colors going on. The building still looks essentially the same, but now the sign, the roof, and the border colors are brown. Now if I see that those border colors are flashing mostly, and that the building has a careful balance that might be able to be maintained, I'll turn off the border colors, because those are just additional. That's just an additional thing that is not really required. Okay, so let's move around and see. It blends okay. You still see through the character. Okay, then we have this scene, which we already know the contrast of the colors is way too much, and we'll have to change. So going through this process over and over and over again, I'll eventually find several groups of colors that I can use, and then from that point on I should be safe for the majority of my screens.